Well, good afternoon to everyone and welcome to today's virtual design review panel meeting. This is the second item on today's agenda. I'm Joe Bordeloni, host of this meeting, but panel member David Clucio will be the chair. In addition to the panel members, we have applicant team, city staff, members of the public, and the media observing this meeting. Members of the public are welcome to observe the meeting only. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the DRP webpage. Just a reminder, please keep your microphones muted if you are not speaking. Thank you, and David, please begin the meeting.
Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Joe, can you please confirm that the session is being recorded?
It is.
And are there any changes to the agenda today?
There are not, no.
I assume that any panel members who have a conflict are not present today. Otherwise, we can go forward. And the second item on the agenda today is the review of 433 King Street East. The lead planner, is that the correct address? I think have I got the wrong panel? Sorry, I've got the wrong.
Yeah, it's 166 and 190 Main Street.
Yeah, hold on a sec. I've got the wrong introductory for some reason here. Apologize for that.
It may just be a typo in that document.
Is
David,
Alana
the same one.
Baldassare? Who's the planner today? Sorry, is it Alana Baldassare again, or is it somebody else?
No, it's Mark.
Sorry,
it's Mark Keeler.
Okay, Mark, can you go forward with the presentation? While that's going on, you have 10 minutes, as you're probably familiar. I'm going to check and see if I can find the proper agenda here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Mark Kaler. I'm a senior planner on the urban team with the Planning Division, City of Hamilton, and I'm here to present just to set up this application at 166 to 190 Main Street West. It is an active site plan control application that has been submitted. So the purpose of this meeting is to gather feedback from the panel to help staff in preparing going forward with this file and moving towards conditional site plan approval. So the proposal is to construct a mixed-use development consisting of 3 27-story towers above 2 base buildings. There's a total of 905 dwelling units, 826 square meters of commercial space, and 626 parking spaces. So the site's located on the north side of Main Street West between Caroline Street to the east, Hess Street to the west, and George Street is to the north. So it occupies almost the entire block, and it's currently occupied by a service parking lot. So this is a view of the site from the corner of Main Street West and Caroline Street South. You can see surface parking lot. You can see Hess Village kind of in the background, as well as a more recent multiple apartment building development. Here's a view from Main Street West at Hess looking northeast. You can see downtown Hamilton in the background. View from George Street and Hess Street South looking southeast. And then here's a view from the corner of George Street and Caroline Street South. You can see the existing development across the street along Main Street West, a hotel and some apartment buildings. And just a couple of photos of what's around it. This is to the west, lower scale commercial buildings, part of Hess Village. And then along George Street, a bit of a lower rise commercial character as well, moving into downtown with some taller buildings. So again, just to remind us of what is being reviewed today, 3 27-story towers above 2 base buildings. Here's a view of the elevations. And in terms of the policies, so the site is located in the downtown urban growth center towards the western portion of downtown. And And so it's also then designated downtown mixed use area in the Urban Hamilton official plan. So some key policy themes from the volume 1 of the official plan. So the downtown urban growth center, this is the city's preeminent node. It has, due to its scale, density, and the range of uses that it contains. And it's planned for a range of uses appropriate for this, this status as the city's preeminent node. So it functions both as a residential neighborhood with a large and diverse population and a range of housing types. And the downtown mixed use area designation, it serves as the central focus of the city. It's meant to create a sense of place, and higher density forms of housing are encouraged, and they should be integrated with business uses, including retail, service, commercial on the ground floor. Oh, I'm going backwards. So as it is downtown, it's also subject to the downtown Hamilton secondary plan, and it's designated downtown mixed use. And it's identified as a high-rise 2 site on map B61-2 in the secondary plan. So some major themes there. The mixed use, downtown mixed use policies of the secondary plan are intended to support an intensive urban scale mixed use area. The high or tall buildings category, the high-rise 2 category permits up to 30 stories, but it requires that any new tall buildings not exceed the height of the top of the Niagara escarpment. So in this case, but the block between Caroline and Hess, that escarpment height is 189.1 meters above sea level. It also has direction that building base shall be designed to fit harmoniously with adjacent street wall and to mitigate sun and shadow impacts. And there should be adequate separation between towers on site.
Somebody is typing. Could they mute their mic, please?
Thanks, David.
Sorry, Mark.
That's okay. So that's both to provide sun access and sky views, protect development potential, and limit wind and shadow impacts. And finally, tall buildings proposals shall be evaluated using the Downtown Hamilton Tall Building Guidelines. Some key urban design policies from the secondary plan. Development shall provide for a transition in scale through a variety of design methods that could include angular planes, the orientation of buildings, and step backs and setbacks of building mass. Some criteria for shadow. Development shall allow for a minimum 3 hours of sun coverage between 10 and 4, as measured on March 21st on public sidewalks and other amenity areas. For tower tops of tall buildings, they should be designed so they are a recognizable landmark and contribute to an iconic and distinctive skyline. And any significant views of the Niagara Escarpment shall be maintained. So in this case, Hess Street South and Caroline Street South are view corridors to the escarpment. Under the zoning bylaw, the property is zone D1, which is the downtown central business district zone. And some regulations that are really there to implement those policies of the secondary plan. There's a maximum building height of 79 meters for the site. As well, there's building-based facade heights, after which there's a required 3-meter step back to create that street wall along John Street North, along Main Street West. It's 22 meters. That's a typo there. It's 16 meters on Hess Street South, 16 meters on Caroline Street South, and 11 meters on George Street. So again, after that building-based facade height, there's a required 3-meter step back. And then for the towers, any building exceeding 44 meters in height requires a 12.5-meter step back from a side or rear lot line. And then the 25-meter separation distance between portions of a building exceeding 44 meters in height on the same property. So that's to implement that tower separation direction from the secondary plan. And I should note that that 12.5 is on interior lot lines, so it wouldn't apply to the street. And this being mostly an entire block, that's definitely relevant. From the tall building guidelines, some key guidelines is a maximum floor plate size for residential towers. And the guideline is that they not exceed 750 square meters. The guidelines do say that larger floor plates may be permitted where other guidelines can be met. For building faces along a public street, they shouldn't be longer than 70 meters. And where buildings are greater than 40 meters in length along the street, they should be broken up so their perceived mass with articulation or changes in materials. There's also some specific direction for the Main Street corridor, which the property is part of. First, that buildings shall contribute to the creation of public open space along the street through appropriately located amenity areas that contribute to the pedestrian environment along Main Street, and that new development should be pedestrian scaled along the street. Taller buildings should be massed in such a manner that additional height will not result in adverse shadow or wind impacts on public sidewalks. So these are the 3 questions I'm requesting some feedback on from the panel. First is, does the proposal demonstrate sensitivity towards community identity through an understanding of a place, context, setting in both the public and private realm? Second, does the proposal complement and animate existing surroundings through building design and placement, as well as through placement of pedestrian amenities? And finally, does the proposal respect prominent sites, views, and vistas in the city? And that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mark. I think we'll go to the proponent's presentation. And again, limited to 10 minutes, please.
Great. Can I share my screen?
Sure.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Just got to find it here. Share. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Thanks very much. My name is Brent Whitby. I'm a partner at Kirker Architects and Planners. Just out of expediency, I will run through the whole presentation. Representative of some of the other disciplines, we can certainly return to comments. At the meeting, representing our, of course, our client is, for BGO, Bentel Green Oak is Brad Kako and Ryan Moore. Our landscape architect is Baker Turner with Michael Thistle. Our heritage consultant is ERA with Neil Phillips. We do have sustainability people on board with Purpose Building and Luka Matavinovich. And of course, our planner for the day is Andrew Hannaford with MHBC. So they, they're the team that have helped put this together over the last many months. And certainly just as a bit history is that we did come in, maybe a year and almost 2 years ago, just before COVID, with an application. We've since taken away a lot of the comments that came with that first site plan approval and really tried to amend a lot of the work that we'd have done to date here. I'm not going to particularly go through a lot of the site context other than, we do understand the importance of the site being at the western edge of the downtown development node, but we've also recognized the importance of the site, with regard to what, how BGO wants to position this building as a rental property in the core of Hamilton, or certainly the western edge of the core, connected to many aspects of the city and the surrounding area, whether it's by train, by, major arteries, and of course, the proposed new LRT station, LRT line that's now coming through Hamilton. Part of the bigger context discussion that, of course, we can't, is important to the understanding of the site is really, how do tall buildings and densities integrate closely with a historical neighborhood that is part of the Hess Village Entertainment District. That has been a part of our discussion really since day one, and has really guided a lot of our approach, together with some of the site constraints that we've had on the site. One of the biggest things in the site context that we do, and have clearly understood, is there's a big fall on the site. Not to mention that, there's Hess Village, but it does fall in essence of 8 meters from the southwest corners to the northeast corners, which is, equivalent to 25 feet, which, over a large site, although it looks flat as it is a parking lot, as it transitions down into the Hess Village and north towards Caroline Street, it has posed its own problems. And then really, we know the site, we know it's a parking lot, and part of the narrative that we need to be, carefully integrate is how do we extend the Hess Street, the vitality of the Hess Street Village or the Hess Village, closer to Main Street to build that living edge to something that really is an area without a lot of context. I mean, it is, after all, a parking lot that's against a very busy Main Street, which feathers back into the Hess Village as delicately as it can't, because it is just an open site next to a busy highway. So really a big portion of our focus has been how do we bring forward that fabric, back towards Main Street to give the edge back to Main Street and really extend the Hess Street priority. One of the main discussions that we did go into was really a detailed analysis of heritage, and we often wonder, how does heritage apply to tall buildings and complex podiums? But the heritage analysis was, what can we extract from the elements that exist around us? How do we respectfully address 35 Hess Street and the Traymar apartments that are just on the corner of the site? And how can we integrate some of the discussion of lost heritage and street edge that did exist on the site before we got before it was turned into a parking lot? Lots of course, historical imagery that can define not just the materiality, but really the proportions that we can start apply to the building in terms of, heights and of podiums and heights of window elements and scale of elements and divisions on the elevation. And these things become important aspects in how we apply to, particularly large buildings in sensitive sites, because the podium and the public realm really have to have priority so that the towers themselves just become invisible above them as best we can. And so we've spent a lot of time with ERA and their team working on identifying these elements, structuring them in a way that we could understand them in our elevations, and then reapplying them into a study of, heights and really street wall heights as they used to exist, and try to bring them up in the context of a large building. Always a challenge, but really fundamentally important as we get closer to George Street and really what was a historical edge at one point, and then of course the historical buildings that are at the corner. I mean, it's a very fast snapshot of what we've done and what we've been able to achieve, but a lot of it has to do with a very in response to SBA comments that we got with our first submission was, how do we indeed step away from the existing corner apartment and give the building enough of a breathing room while creating a context that moves down George and Hess towards Main Street and back towards Carolyn, extending a sense of the context that we have in the heritage context itself. And this is just moving up, and we'll talk about this elevation a little bit further. The site organization, again, not going to go too deep into this. We understand there's a large fall in the site. We understand the basic, the important principles that are, tower separation on a site and what is the optimum that we can provide. We understand the need for 750 square meter plates and 25 meter tower separations, and really becomes an exercise in street orientation. We do start playing with the shifts in towers to facilitate what is open space on Main Street. That has always been a priority in this design, is really to, focus well-lit, usable spaces. Even though it's a busy artery, we knew that we could shape it in a certain way that would give quality to the project, but also give some relief to what was a very intense program initially on our site plan, to open up the street along Main Street and give it some relief. Again, we understand the busyness of Main Street, which is essentially a 5-lane highway, but really the main thoroughfare, and understand the address of the site as you come east into the downtown, and that the importance of the corner, essentially, which is the southwest corner, of how that would look. Then, of course, the slower nature of the sites that are, Hess Street, George Street, and Caroline, understanding not just their view corridors, but the pedestrian nature, a residential nature, and really sort of that hybrid mix that makes these, integrate little neighborhoods, quite successful. Again, street wall organization and the base of the building is really the fundamental piece. That simplifies sort of the exploration that we went into, but really that's what we're looking for, is to allow these buildings to bleed away while still, accommodating setbacks, podium uses, building separation, so that we can in fact break wind. We have, break the wind on these towers. We have found some strategies successful on these, and we've applied them again to this project. I'm going to go quickly into our site organization because it really gets into the imagery of the building. It is developed in a phase strategy. Phase 1 being at the the left side of the page, the westernmost. Phase 2 being the rightmost of the page. Developing the second 2 towers. The big issue on this particular one is the fall. That we did in fact start to see an ability to integrate parts of the underground onto a streetscape presence because there was an 8-meter fall. Allowed us to eliminate some of the exits from the ground, from the adjacent George and Hess streets because we had initially thought we could enter at a certain point. The grading allowed us to do it, but more importantly, allowed us to put more street-oriented functions at a lower level before we got into some of the main programming of the buildings. You can see that we identified an amenity function, some amenities, important amenities, to encourage a different sort of way of traveling in the city. Providing one of the main bicycle amenities, not as a storage room where residents can keep it and visit as a building, but something that can actually be used and seen as an amenity, whether it's a common share bike or something that is really promoting a different attitude towards transportation, the core that aligns with what is mixed modal transportation now being introduced by the LRT. Of course, providing secondary residential entrances so that we can get into the LRT that's just up the road, and then our ground unit entrances. So of course we start to see the shape that it's taking, where you can see the bike room a little further down, the residential's taking shape, and of course an entrance that's important on all streets. As we move up into a mid-level, we really step above that higher level, so we're at that next tier up, where you start to see the introduction of retail lobby spaces, then internal residential, to really break up the mass of this site and the mass of the building very much in line with the urban design guidelines. It's trying to bring that textural feel deep into the site, a residential node, but also, a viable retail at the corner that can be easily identified together with the lobby functions. Again, very purposeful hierarchy placed into the site to make sure that the retail had a place, had a presence, and then you move into the semi-private zones, semi-public zones of the lobby, and then to the more private zones of the site, which did allow for some access for residential uses. And again, you start to see how that takes its shape as there's a retail where it says signage, the Main Street lobbies, you start to drive in underneath the tower, very much like a hotel entrance. Again, populating a sequence of events as you drive through the site that is quite experiential and not just a road that comes in and saying we're a private driveway. Again, running back into the more private aspects of the site that we see, in the distance here. The last level of the site is the westernmost of the site, where we're really at that highest corner of the site. Again, this is one of the most prominent corners in the site where we've really looked to develop an appropriate retail presence on that corner, but also a residential presence that starts to move down Hess Street South that is, consistent with, keeping activity on the street, keeping, a main address on what is the primary access to our project, being Hess Street on this side of the project. And then again, upper levels of residential units that flank the rest of the tower. Again, another, diagram where you can start to see the retail populating the two corners, lobby functions that are appropriately placed in sort of the midspan of the blocks, and then residential is moving back towards the further sections of the site. And again, this is that transition. Because we're at such a high level, there's a lower lobby that comes off the driveway that steps up to the retail in the corner. You can see as we're coming, east into the downtown area, where you can see a significant effort to make, a retail presence say this is really an extension of Hess Village. This is where Hess Village can extend with our residential entrance just further down, and then you can see the historical buildings down in the corner. So we really did, take an effort to acknowledge that there is a need for important retail at the corner that opens up with some patio functions, residential uses, and some amenity lobby spaces that have an in and out and an activity of just daily life that transition themselves into the balance of Hess Village. The landscape in itself has been, along Main Street. It's a very steep sort of transition in there, and it's a very urban landscape. We've looked at some, things that are sensitive to, moderate, foliage cover, good transitional cover as we get into the transition from Main Street down into our internal driveway, because you can see the steps there. It is quite a drop that goes into it. And then again, what are appropriate urban edges that can, you know, be maintained in the long haul, that will complement a semi-private, semi-public zone that goes into the residential functions that are aligning it. We have spaced well, we believe, from the historical homes that exist on the northwest corner. We have set away with good residential buffers to, you know, screen those homes from them, give them the breathing space against what is a tall tower. You know, the problematic ones we recognize is how to address those pedestrian crossovers through loading bays and through the turn-ins and what have you. And you know, those are a work in progress. We'll continue to work on those with the city to find the best answers. We know they are sort of this, you know, the sore spot on these particular plans, but plans have to have these access points eventually, and eventually the site does have to give somewhere in exchange for the other pieces. So this is where we propose today. And then moving into the upper orientation of amenities at the upper floors, where we still, in fact, have rooftop terraces. Again, the building looks back. We have the amenities at the higher floors so that we can continue to have these active faces that look out over the streets, which really is an, you know, an important dynamic on having that mixed feel on the street and a living edge. Just a quick commentary about where we were and where we at now. The application at the top of the drawing was an above grade parking structure that was a hard, you know, podium, four-sided with an internal road and multiple points. The version that we have down below, what we're currently proposing, is certainly soften the edge. The client is committed to putting all parking below grade, not above grade, in spite of the soils conditions that are in Hamilton, which are just essentially yogurt. And really managing the issues there, because they believe in the condition of the living edge and the street wall and the extension of Hess Village. And just rounding out the discussion, you know, really walking through the building as we sort of come around. The three towers as they are, and you can certainly see the retail elements with the lobby in the corners and the residential starting to proceed up Caroline Street. Our important corner as we're really starting to walk around at Main Street with the residential entrance, are cascading down into our internal street with a lower residential entrance, and the retail does slightly look over it. And then, you know, the residential units continue back through the walkway. Again, our entrances into the phase 2 of the building. Primary entrance, again, very hotel-like with retail on the corner. Wrapping the corner, you know, an active retail edge with good accommodation for back of house, with amenity and main entrances down the edge. Residential uses, you know, priority as being, you know, our client was very bullish in keeping this residential feel as we move back towards Hess, combined with what we had. It was a good blend of the issues that we had. You can see we've tried to bleed out the loading bays and the ramp as best we can, and I think we've been quite successful in maintaining the proportions that ERA set, and a lot of the materiality in terms of wood, scale of bay, the texture, even in the scale of the brick, is something that we're looking to replicate from some of the historical analysis that we've done. Again, a further look into the back Main Street door that comes out through phase 2. Again, give our residents, you know, direct access into the Hess Street Village, you know, out to the LRT, something that's recognizable. So there's two scales of entrances. You know, this one would be for the people that know the neighborhood, know the building, are familiar with it, more likely not the visit occurs, but more likely your day-to-day residents.
Brent, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up.
Yeah, and this is all we've got, David. We're gone through the images and the walkthrough, and I have nothing further.
Okay, thank you. So questions, and we're going to have to be pretty concise here on the questions. Is Ted on the screen, or is Dana the first speaker? Not sure Ted was able to make it.
He had to cancel last minute.
So Dana is not seeing Dana either. So Yana, you might be the winner again.
And just because we don't have enough time, I'm fine. My questions are small questions. Okay, I can ask one of them. Like I don't understand the height. Why are we pushing the height over the escarpment limit? What is the reasoning behind it? Why are we ignoring that height set by the city? If there is any reason, if you could explain that.
There is reason. I think Brad, can you chime in? Or can you unmute or no?
You hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the question, Janet, and thanks for the presentation. We're struggling with a number of things on the site. Topography, as Brent outlined, is one of them. The site tilts or slopes in two different directions, with the delta being about 7 meters across the site. Ironically, if the building at the highest point or at the lowest point, it would come in under the height limit. So it is the topography. And the other piece that is contributing to the need for this particular density is the unusual and very difficult soils conditions. We have rock very, very deep, but in between the rock and the underside of the parking garage, we have really, really poor soils conditions. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you.
Jennifer Sison.
Thanks for your presentations. Brent, you touched on it quickly, but the 5 separate driveways that are leading into the site, are all of these needed, or could some of them be consolidated?
No, we actually consolidated them down, Jennifer, from about 8 or 9 driveways. We did actually, they are needed. Essentially, the phases are primarily, they're separate. They are being designed as separate and independent standalone buildings. So the access that we have into the westernmost property is a combined parking and loading entrance. The challenge of the entrance from Main Street is really, we had to simplify that based on comments too. We had 2 entrances coming in from Main Street, but we do need an entrance in from Main Street because of visitor and, just basic drop-off traffic. And then the one that comes in through the back on Main, it can only come as a one-way Main Street through there, Jennifer, because the city will not entertain really a return back out to Main Street because of it's busy and because we'll have cross traffic and just the nature that it runs. And then, of course, the last 2 entrances are for loading and the driveway back into the phase 2 portions of the building. So we have streamlined them down from 8 to 5, and I think even 9 down to 5. So we've cut them almost in half, but it's the best we can get to right now.
Okay, thank you. And was a wind study completed? I just didn't see it in the package if it is.
The wind study is not completed yet.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Hoda.
Thank you, David. Hi, and thank you for your presentation. I just have a question from you or from the city about the street trees. I was wondering, rather than the trees that you are offering inside the property beside the podium, wasn't in the in the plan to design and to have street trees along Main Street?
Michael, I'll turn that over to you, but what I'll initially say, Hoda, is that it's not in the conversation. We took our designs really to the extent of the property lines in many cases, particularly along Main Street, because we know there's a road widening that is coming there, and again on George Street. So there is a discussion to be had with the city, certainly, about what can be accommodated down there. It's just, in the moment of time, the exact sort of profile of the boulevard once the widenings happen and once the project is sort of conveyed just isn't fully known yet. So I wouldn't say that it's certainly being ignored. It's just something we haven't pursued, I think, at length with the city, and there's certainly more conversation to come. But maybe, Michael, you know a little bit more about that.
I think that was very well said, Brent. I don't really have much to add. We've added as much trees as we can along George Street within our property line, and there are streets along Main Street within the property that will have a presence as you are moving along Main Street there, but everything is kept within the property line.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Jennifer Malley.
Thanks, David. I have 3 questions, but the first 2 should be really quick. Can you confirm the area of the tower plates? Do you exceed the 750 meter floor plate?
Roman, what you have it's just over right now. We're just over 825 square meters.
Okay. Second question, because I think there's some conflicting information in the documentation. Can you confirm that the separation between the 2 towers is at least 25 meters?
And I think, I believe they are, yes.
Okay. And then third question, which would maybe take a couple sentences to answer. I see you've got a sustainability consultant on board. So beyond added bike share, what are the initiatives being proposed for this development?
At the high level, Jennifer, like BGO is developing internally quite a comprehensive corporate sustainability policy. It really is a part of sort of brought down from Sun Life. So that is in the works right now. We are, they're working through it, and it hasn't taken final shape yet. So we are reviewing more in depth about what that's going to take and how it applies to our building. But it's part of a broader aspect over all the portfolio, which I think is going to be quite aggressive, but I can't speak for sure. It's really, Brad, maybe you know more about that.
Yes, thank you, Brent. So just very quickly, late last year into early this year, our parent company, Sun Life, as well as BGO, both went public with 2 initiatives to be net zero by 2050 and 2030, respectively. So given that is a recent announcement, we are now trying to align all of our active development files up to those corporate goals and initiatives, and that work will continue throughout the remainder of the year and likely into the first part of next year. This project will be studied in context of those broader goals and initiatives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joey?
I don't have any questions. Thanks.
I don't think Eldon's on, so I think we can skip to the commentary. And again, Yana, I think you're
Okay.
number one.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and I would like to say that I think that there are some really great improvements to the previous proposal, especially at the street level, and some very nice gestures, and I would encourage you to continue these efforts and explore them even farther. My main concern is the overall massing. I really don't think that we should be looking at 3 very tall towers. In regard to the height, I do not see the reasons which you identified as valid for not adhering to the city's requirements to not be taller than the escarpment. I really think you should lower the build form, not just like 1 or 2 stories. Towers seem, to me, they seem that they are much larger floor plates than what you identified. I might be wrong, but it seems to me at least 2 of them. And again, city has their standards. I don't see the reason why these shouldn't be kept. I don't see real step backs from the streets. They are very close. The towers are very close to the streets. And to me, the pedestrian environment should be really achieved. And in my opinion, this really needs a redesign. And in this area, in the Hess Village area, we really should be looking more on mid-rise development with some maybe taller portions, but definitely not 3 towers of this massing as proposed. So overall, to me, this is really large massing for the site, and I think it really needs a redesign. And I'll stop at that. I know we have limited time, but these were my major points. Thank you.
Jennifer Sison.
Thank you. So I'll start with the building massing. I do appreciate that both on George and Hess Street, you really tried to continue that 2-story street wall height. However, I agree with Yana. I think the step back needs to be increased at least to that required 3-meter minimum to help this read as like a distinctive street wall and podium. Also, in terms of the height, I'd rather see a reduction in the parking overall and bringing the height down rather than blocking the view to the escarpment. I also find that the floor plates, at least for building 2 and 3, are too large. They should be brought down to the 750 square meters to respect the tall building guidelines. And further, I'd echo Yana, I really do think the changes you've made since the last SPA submission really helped the podium read as separate with the changes in material and the rhythm of the building bays you've shown on George Street are great to break up that frontage and respect the context. However, I don't really see justification for the reduction in step backs or the increase in height above the escarpment that this project's requesting. In terms of the pedestrian realm, I do have a concern with the shade impacts from the proposed buildings on Hess Village, particularly in shoulder seasons where the microclimate's going to be really important for that street life and for the restaurants here. It'd be really helpful to have understood the wind impacts, and I recommend that you take both the wind impacts and the shade impacts into account when you're refining the design and try to reduce those impacts on Hess Village. Also, you've created kind of a double driveway on George, that easternmost driveway nearest Caroline Street. I find that's a real negative in terms of pedestrian safety and comfort. And while I appreciate that you've already reduced driveways, I would encourage you to explore methods to ensure pedestrian safety and comfort. And if you can reduce this width or break up the two driveways to provide some pedestrian refuge, that would be helpful. I appreciate overall that you've shown a lot of thoughtfulness on Main Street with the patio spaces and retail at both corners, as well as consideration of creating activity. I think the landscape design along this frontage has been well done in response to the grade changes and the challenges you have here. And overall, I really do look forward to seeing this development built. So thank you all.
Hoda?
Thank you, David, and thank you for presentation. I really appreciate the improvement that has happened in design, especially having underground parking and activating the main street. That's so great to encourage pedestrian and having retails along Main Street. Great job. My concerns, first of all, is about view to the escarpment. And I know there are lots of high-rise buildings in the past and probably coming in downtown Hamilton, but having the escarpment not covered, that is the concern that I have. And as less as possible, we should try to have buildings a bit lower. That is general. But my other concern is about the height of the building number 1 beside, actually along Hess Street and beside Hess Village, and the effect of that. Although there is a setback and the first level, the design is trying to match the existing, but I think that, as my colleague said, the shade effect will change all the atmosphere of Hess Street. So I really encourage you to review the height of building 1, and have something lower, maybe mid-rise, and create the steps between buildings, and not only in one building setting back. So probably that would be a good solution to have building 1 mid-rise. These are my comments, and again, thank you.
Jennifer Malik?
Thanks, David, and thanks for your presentation. I think you're hearing a similar comment from all of us on the panel that, we're kind of astounded with the development pressure that's happening in Hamilton. We've seen a lot of proposals for very big towers, and the challenge for us is to decide, what's Hamilton of the future. At this particular site, the transition between Main Street to the Hess Street Village is of particular concern, and I echo Hoda's comment there that maybe a greater effort to make a transition to the heritage fabric would be appreciated or more appropriate. The scale jump from that tower right at Hess right down to the smaller houses is to me a little harsh. I completely appreciate putting retail on the Main Street side. I mean, the Main Street pedestrian realm needs that kind of sidewalk activity to avoid it or to bring it back from the 5-lane highway that it is right now. But I do encourage that can't be at the detriment of providing retail on the Hess Street or the George Street side. That smaller granular retail that was Hess Street, you have an opportunity here to reestablish what Hess Village was and maybe make it better. So I think I would appreciate a greater effort on the other side as well. Hess Village is, this, red brick buildings, heritage buildings, and big leafy trees. And I think you've got an opportunity here to make even some of the elevated amenity spaces, and this maybe sound crazy, but like some really big trees on those elevated amenity spaces, so that in a totally modern, contemporary, urban living way, you're just bringing in the greenery of Hess Village and softening the Main Street corridor. Those are all my comments. Thank you.
Joey.
Thanks, David, and thanks everyone for your presentation. I'm going to focus my comments on the heritage strategy, and I think it's rare when it comes to these types of developments that we see applicants talking about the importance of heritage, thinking about heritage on a site that actually has no heritage at all, and that's been long gone. So the study to kind of look back, dig into the archives and research and see what's there, and to use that as influence in how to organize the site and how to kind of think about massing, I think is a real strength of this process to date. The understanding that there's a sort of datum, whether it's infilled through solids or voids, that is developed by the height of the heritage homes, is a very strong approach. And I think that datum carried out, even though it varies throughout the site, that datum carried out makes for a very strong ground floor level. I do have, Brent, if you don't, would you mind bringing your presentation back up, and specifically the rendering on Hess Street? And again, going back to the studies that you did with ERA and looking at and Jennifer Mallard brought this up, like the granular characteristics of Hess Street, and how do you consider those and how do you apply those to the proposed development? I think there are notions of it here, but the Hess Street one. So I just wanted to, because the Hess Street one also showed a part of the heritage building.
I think it was the first one you opened, actually.
Was it the first?
But this captures it too.
Yeah, that captures it too. The idea that the heritage homes and the buildings on their own establish a certain patterning, and I see how that patterning is starting to kind of develop in a more contemporary. Here it is. That was it. It's starting to develop in a more yeah, was that last? That's it.
There.
Anyway, this is fine. How that patterning is starting to develop throughout the podium condition. But at this space right here, I think it's a good one to look at because it's in direct, well, it is along Hess. So it's sort of, this is the new, this for me is the new sort of entry point to Hess Street. So how do you align with that? And I think what this is not doing yet is it's not aligning with the granular qualities and the patterning of the buildings. Right now, this reads, the brick part only, it reads like a small industrial building. So I think as you continue to develop the design, you really look closely at those, at those studies and at the existing conditions to see how it could align more with the typology of the street. I mean, we can't ignore that right above the brick is a kind of a black box condition, an extension of the podium. I appreciate you trying to kind of distinguish it, but I mean, I think what it needs is a little bit more depth. The brick facade needs more depth in the same way that the existing buildings have depth, and I think that goes back to many of the comments that my colleagues made earlier about the size of the towers and also of the podium. Thank you for your project.
Thanks, Joey. So Actually, if you could keep your images up there.
Sure.
There are some quite beautiful things that you've done, I think, around the edge of the lower portion of the building, and I think it's the efforts that you've done along the straight, the lower podium is quite commendable in terms of what you had previously, and I think it's very successful. I have to say I agree with the assessment of my colleagues on the sort of density, particularly at this end of the street. And I would echo what Joey just was saying about this particular part of the podium. I think these I forget the north street, is it George? Is that right?
North one is George. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think that and along the sort of muse that you have there, I think you've got quite a successful treatment there. The brick is working quite successfully. I feel that where you have it at the, I wonder if you might want to take that sort of strategy and material and bring it along Main Street and maybe bring the brick a bit more around the south side and wrap the corner onto Main Street. I think that quality of design I'd like to see kind of develop, and particularly I guess the tower that's the furthest west, is that Tower 1, is that correct?
Yes, that's Tower 1. Yeah.
My observation is that the other two towers, somehow their architectural composition and proportion and their character is much more successfully resolved than Tower 1. It's somehow Tower 1, it seems like it bulges out at the bottom. Maybe if you just took I mean, this is fairly aggressive strategy, but I mean, like it just doesn't seem as coherent as the others. And I'm wondering whether the kind of somehow the hand that developed the lower part here, or the approach, or somehow that would be applied to that, and the other two towers are somehow that sort of level of refinement would be applied to those other two towers. And I think the idea that you might have some kind of more unequal and rising to the west, or sorry, rising to the east and lowering more significantly to the west to kind of give the idea that somehow Hess is a important center in the city, and that the development around it should respond to that and lower down there. I do notice that you increased rather significantly your parking count when you went from your earlier scheme to this scheme, and I have to admit I was sort of looking to try and find the schedules here. You may have responded to that in your explanation of your parking garage, and I missed it. I don't know if you want to.
Oh yeah, David. I mean the best way to put this is there's a viability concern on this site, and I'll speak quite plainly about it. Is that to put the parking underground? What it does is that it's a very, very different structure than we would do in Mississauga or downtown Toronto. I mean, we're all aware of what the soil is like here. So what we did is when we push it down, it opened up those units that used to be on these mid floors. Remember, like this used to be all parking, right? Mm-hmm. And so because we added more units, it pushes into the underground garage and it generates more parking. But the unit count and the rates that come from these things are important pieces in the viability of this. The construction in this soil to try and keep a living street edge that isn't a parking garage above grade is a hurdle. And I can say that the big chunk of the time that we took over really the last 2 years was a monumental soils, hydrological, structural study to understand what we were faced with. And that's why I think peek over the escarpment.
Maybe I can add are you creating that many parking spaces to respond to an increase in units, or because you need to go down to a certain strata of soil in order to make the thing work?
We need to. It's the combination of both. We can only go so deep, to be honest with you, before it doesn't work anymore.
At all.
Yeah.
But I guess so you're saying that the parking ratio is essentially the same, it's just you've increased the units. Is that
because we removed those
Yeah.
mid sections of the building. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess I can't comment on the financial viability. It's interesting that you have explained it there, but it is given that if this was anywhere else in the city, not adjacent to Hess, it we wouldn't be in this conversation. I think that it's the conflict with building 1 so close to Hess. I think that it's and also that it has this weird. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that weird, but to me, a little odd at the bottom where the black is so much bigger. The other ones, you're kind of you have a waist at the bottom that pulls in, and then you have in the foreground here, you have the retail sort of sticking out beyond that, and so there's a kind of a relationship there. The other one, the one at the end, with the sort of larger mass and then the smaller tower, seems odd given the composition of the rest, and it is unfortunately right at the point where there's this important Hess building. And to echo the earlier, I mean, we tried to analyze the floor plates, and I don't know whether your comment about 825 only applied to Tower 1, but the other two seem to be even larger. When we tried to figure out the size of those floor plates, they do seem well beyond the 750 even. I mean, one of them seemed to getting close to over 900, so 1,000 almost.
I'm just getting clarification here from my guy Roman, who's on the line. Tower 1 is sub 750, and towers 2 and 3 are 825.
Okay, well, that's interesting, because the other thing is we saw at least one drawing, the dimension between towers 1 and 2 on a floor plan is identified as 23.3. So I mean, there's a little bit of confusion for us. I mean, we're scaling off drawings because we don't have that information, but I guess we'll take your word for that. So, I mean, if they are, so you're saying that Tower 1 is 750. Is that like eliminating the elevators and the stairs and stuff like that, or is it like the actual footprint excluding just the balcony?
Roman, why don't you just dial in instead of typing me? Just
because it does seem to be.
It might be
sorry, that 23.3 dimension is from the building 2 tower to the building 1 podium. So right above that fourth level plan, then it goes to the 25. And so it's just the way that we talked about how that site climbs from the northeast to southwest. So that's just where the lower portion of Tower 2 starts, and it meets at the building 1 podium. But then once you hit up to it's the level 6 in the building 1, then you're back to that 25.
So at those lower levels, when we were comparing, I mean, are the towers the same otherwise? I mean, we just did our own quick calculations and we got way bigger towers. So, I mean, obviously we were doing something scaleways wrong. So I apologize for those if we have those commentary incorrect and your towers are all within the required sizing.
I think just the one within required sizing. I think they were saying the other two are larger, just not as large as we saw them, and maybe it's also the proportions of them, right? That they are so long. That's maybe why it creates such a huge massing. Sorry, David.
Hi, David and Jen. It's Brad Keiko from Bentall Greenock. I'd just like to highlight the fact that 25 meters in terms of a separation is extremely important to BGO as long-term owners of the property. And so if there's anything substandard, we'd be happy to talk about it. My belief is that everything meets 25 meters minimum.
Okay, yeah. In some ways, it's the footprint size that's more concerning. And if you are confident that they're under the 750 or very close to the 750, it shouldn't be. I mean, we don't really have anything to concern ourselves on in terms of redirecting. It doesn't really change the observations about the overall scale of the project that we're quite concerned about. Any case, the other thing is there were some with towers of this size, you know, the earlier comments about shade and wind impact that I think are also obviously a concern. I don't know if you have any other questions for us, because I think we've gone beyond our time here. But before we run, if there's any other clarifications you have about our commentary, I open the floor.
Nothing from Kirkor's side. We'll just take the comments away. We appreciate the comments, and of course we'll digest them with our client. But I don't have anything I can add, I think, at this point.
A conundrum. Anyway, we hope that you were able to work something out with the site. It's an generally, as I said earlier, the work at the base and even the general aesthetic of the towers is commendable. And it is they're just huge. That's our concern, given the Hess context. So I know you're battling against a financial challenge there, but
I think David too, it's also, what is appropriate, I think is the discussion that we're having with planning too. And I think, the being near the LRT, being in the intensification zone, being rental properties that are being introduced into the heart of downtown, Hamilton, which haven't been introduced in probably 40 years as sort of a primary thing, we do believe it's appropriate, but I think that's one of those things that, we just have to take back and digest and understand how we can take those comments and apply them. That's the way I would respond to it, because in this intensification zone, in where it's being identified at the west end of that downtown zone, and knowing that it's a important rental product that BGO is committed to doing as long-term landholders, these are all the things that drive height and density and mass on these things, and are some of the base parameters that we work to. So there's an answer in there somewhere. I'm not sure what it is yet, but we'll do a deep dive with Brad and Ryan and share notes.
Okay. Thank you. Otherwise, I think we'll adjourn.
Great. Thanks, David.
Thank you.